Hello and welcome to Bloomberg Quint. The process of fiscal federalism has been a constantly evolving one since independence. Every now and then you get to a juncture where there are developments which need to be perhaps discussed, maybe debated. Some of those developments have been written about along with historical perspective in a book called Indian Fiscal Federalism, co-authored by former RBI Governor Y.V. Reddy and Dr. Gst. Reddy. Joining us here to talk about some of the aspects brought out in the book are both the authors. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Reddy, let me start with you first and ask you about the decision to write this book at this juncture. In the early parts of the book, you talk about the fact that fiscal federalism is at a crossroad. And I don't intend to ask you to summarize the entire book in one answer, but some of the issues which you felt needed to be flagged off along with historical perspective at this stage.
See, over the period, first, of course, we had the planning period. In the planning period, the moment you have centralized planning, in some ways it is inconsistent with the dual polity and federation. There was that issue, but that was easily reconciled through variety of processes, including the leadership of Pandit Nehru. He used to take chief ministers into confidence, and he used to, through letters, he used to share even the global politics and the Indian national security aspects. So that was a collective leadership in some senses. So, and therefore the fiscal federalism got subsumed in the broader collective leadership. That situation went on, and from a purely economic point of view, there were political developments, of course, in 1970s, which changed the situation slightly, partly with the nationalization of banks. And then in 1970s and 80s, there is a bit of a tension which arose, both from political angle and from economic angle. The reforms started. At the time of the reforms, the economic content again became important. At the time of reforms, there was marketization, which means the role of the state got reduced. But the role of the state governments or local governments cannot be entirely reduced. In the reform, you can't get rid of providing water, roads, power. These are in the state jurisdiction. So when you decentralize, the power of the center to regulate has gone down, but the importance of providing these services for business has increased. So in a way, the states have gone into higher profile now. The business finds that they have to cultivate the states, and the states are competing to attract business. So in the balance between the state and the market market empowered, in the state where the state power is distributed in the center and the states have become more important. And that is the bigger picture, and that's likely to persist, that the states will be more and more important than ever before in a marketized economy.
And in that context, Mr. Gst. Reddy, what were some of the important developments that led you to this sort of conclusion or assertion that we are at a crossroads right now, that you felt the need to write this book?
Yeah, actually, a lot of significant developments have taken place, particularly from 2014. One was the recommendations of the Finance Commission, increasing the tax devolution from 32 to 42%. I think it has given an euphoria that it has considerably increased the fiscal space of the states. But in fact, it has not. Actually, previously, the total transfers from the center were around 50% of the gross revenue of the center. It remained more or less the same. Actually, I emphasized it was emphasized very clearly in the report of the Commission that what we are recommending is not an increase in the quantum of transfers, but a compositional shift in favor of the untied transfers. It's only a qualitative shift, not a quantitative one. But this was not appreciated, and even it has got, even the Honorable Prime Minister has written to the Chief Minister saying that now that you are flush with funds, you have got to do this and all that. So we had to take a lot of trouble convincing the central government. In fact, what we have done is not an increase in the fiscal space of the states. I think what has been, and then the developments following the increase in the tax devolution. That was really worrisome because they reduced a number of centrally sponsored schemes like model schools and then backward regions grant fund, increased the share of the matching contribution in centrally sponsored schemes. And then they have done away with several normal plan assistance, which was Gadgil formula based. So this was also a worrying feature. We thought we should put the records straight. I think there was a lot of misconception. Whenever we used to attend the meetings at the center, they used to say, "Oh, why have you come to us? You are flush with funds. You have got 42%." I mean, so we had very difficult time trying to convince the government of India officials that okay, these are the facts. So we were gone on record. And the other development that took place in 2015 was the replacement of the Planning Commission by the Niti Aayog with no role in the allocation of resources. Now, one thing that needs to be appreciated is that the Finance Commission role is restricted to the revenue account. I mean, most of the transfers are on the revenue account. Obviously, for development, you need infusion of capital in the poorer states. That is a function which is basically outside the remit of the Finance Commission. It has to be performed by a separate institutional setup. So with the abolition of the Planning Commission, that institutional setup has gone away, and then there is a vacuum. We thought that there should be some kind of a mechanism. And the other concern that we had in our minds from the state's perspective was that the space vacated by the Planning Commission is being taken over by the central ministries themselves. So they were left with a lot more discretion. So as we were halfway through the book, then we thought, I think we should put the record straight and then capture all these developments in the book. As we were writing the books, two more developments took place. I think I just forgot about the 15th Finance Commission. 15th Finance Commission also raised a lot of concern about the terms of reference, particularly about the use of 2011 population and then restrictions on the borrowings of the states. And then Government of India, Finance Commission taking a call on the propriety of the populist schemes introduced by the Government of India and their record in implementing the flagship programs of the Government of India.
So all of those collectively perhaps led to this book.
There are actually 5 developments.
Yes.
Recommendations of the 14th Finance Commission, GST, abolition of the Planning Commission, terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission, FRBM Review Committee of encasing. I think these put together brought about a new pattern, which gives an impression that the balance may be shifting.
Away from states and towards.
Away from the states, or an attempt is made to shift the balance or something like that. And therefore, that's why we call it crossroads. Never before in the history, for instance, were the terms of reference of Finance Commission so controversial.
Let me get into that issue then straight off. I thought we'll start with GST, but since we're talking about the Finance Commission, let's go straight to that, Dr. Reddy. You chaired the 14th Finance Commission. Now the 15th Finance Commission can relook at some of your recommendations, but that's not where the controversy starts. The first point of controversy seems to be this census and which census is appropriate to use. Do you want to weigh in on whether the right census has been chosen or not?
See, as ex-governor, I avoided talking about the present governors. So as ex-chairman, I will not talk about the present chairman or 15th Finance Commission. Okay. I will talk about 14th Finance Commission. Okay. And from there, you can draw your own inferences. First, when the 14th Finance Commission was constituted, I requested the government to have a political leader in the Finance Commission. Because it's a political matter of having a trust and agreement among the various states and the parties and the center. This has been the tradition for in the first 10 commissions. Secondly, I wanted a judicial member. You very often, most of the time actually, a judge is to be a member because it is in the nature of an arbitration. And then you have the economists. Unfortunately, in my commission, I did not have a representative judiciary or a politician. Therefore, I took on their role. So now somebody, I hope, will take on that role in every finance commission. That's number one. Second, there should be a representation of the state people with experience in the state, because it's a matter of arbitration of sharing of taxes between the center and states. Therefore, in the commission, there should be representation of people with experience in the center and in the states. So there, fortunately, at least we had one member who had strong experience in the state. That's the second thing. Third thing is about the population. So as far as possible, the core is fairly simple. The core is how to share the taxes between the center and the states based on respective needs. And if there are gaps, how do you fill up the gaps? That's all. That's the core. Everything else is add on by the government of the day. In that core, how to measure the needs has been left initially to the Finance Commission itself. Only later, in 1970s or something like that, this population criteria was introduced as a consideration by the President in giving the terms of reference. So 1971 population, the problem, and we faced a problem in 14th Finance Commission. They said 1971 and subsequent developments. So what we did was 1971 we gave some weightage. Subsequent developments we took 2011 population as the proxy for subsequent development. So we mixed the two. But I think logically what the 14th Finance Commission mentioned, the appropriate sentence is, it is not appropriate to take into account an outdated population for assessing the needs of the state. That was the position of the 14th Finance Commission. I cannot go back on that statement now.
Okay, so in some ways, any past census then is not adequate. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
You have to take a future projection into mind.
Yes.
Okay. What about the terms of terms of reference that have created a lot of concern? A few I'll mention. I know there are lots of different issues raised by different people. One is that there is increased fiscal oversight of states given in the terms of reference, increased oversight of debt. Conditionalities can be, further conditionalities can be attached to debt raising by states. Also, whether, this populist measures, whether it's the Finance Commission that should be weighing in on what is populist, what is not populist. Some of those terms of reference, would you say, to both of you, have made the 15th Finance Commission a little bit more of a political exercise than previous Finance Commissions?
Yeah.
Actually, these are some of the considerations. Actually, the core function of the Finance Commission is defined in the Constitution under Article 280. In addition to the core functions, which are listed as such in the TOR, the others are the considerations. Some of the previous Finance Commissions have taken into account the fact that these considerations are not really binding on us. So what is binding on our functioning is the constitutional mandate. So except the use of 2011 population, where the Finance Commission has been specifically asked that the Commission shall take into account 2011 population. As far as other considerations are concerned, the 15th Commission has the freedom, either to take them into account or not to take them into account.
Oh.
This was the experience of the previous Finance Commissions.
So then maybe we are creating a hullabaloo for no reason, because till the actual commission report comes out, we don't know how they will view those.
Actually, what we had written in the book is that we are hoping that the 15th Finance Commission will have the courage and wisdom to take into considerations that are relevant rather than that are not relevant.
Which are the terms of references most damaging to your...
I think we should leave it to the judgment of the 15th Finance Commission.
Okay.
But I must admit that we did say something about this in the book.
Yes. Some of the other issues that are talked about, so the Gst Council is another development that has taken place. You address it in the book, Dr. Reddy. You're quite complimentary about the way the council has evolved so far and the way it's functioned.
I think it's an extraordinarily good institution that has come about. It has come about after working for a couple of decades. It's not just brought about today, and it's a remarkable achievement of political consensus and federation. But the issue that is also raised in the book is the way it is working. It should ensure that it continues to, the central government continues to command the trust of the state government. It's working together. I think that is the only issue that is flagged in the book.
Is that in the context of the voting powers that you talk about? You don't really raise a concern, but you mention the fact that the centre has a veto, given by the virtue
more
of their
than
share.
the veto power. Actually, it has to do with the fiscal space yielded by the centre and the states. The center has yielded only around 30 or 32% of its fiscal space, whereas close to 47% of the fiscal space is subsumed under GST. The more elastic source of tax revenue that was available to the states for the VAT, except VAT on petroleum products and liquor, all other VAT-able goods are subsumed under GST. Now the problem is that so having yielded a lot more space than the center is still left with elastic sources of revenue like customs duties, income tax, corporation tax, whereas the state doesn't have access to such sources of revenue after subsumation of VAT under GST. So a couple of other taxes like luxury tax and entertainment tax are also subsumed under GST. So the problem is that some of the committees which have gone into this question, they recommended that the state, now the GST is distributed equally between the center and the states. 50% goes to the center and 50% goes to the states. But committees have recommended that, I think there was a technical committee appointed by the 13th Finance Commission which recommended a rate of 12%, 7% going to the states and 5% going to the center. And similarly, there is this revenue neutral rate committee headed by former Chief Economic Advisor Dr. Arvind Subramaniam also recommended a higher rate, higher share for the states. But contrary to all these recommendations, what we find is that the tax is being distributed equally between the center and the states. And this may result in further accentuation of the vertical imbalances between the center and the states. That is our larger worry, actually.
Okay. Dr. Reddy, so the expenditure share of states has not gone down. In fact, as you're saying, it's more important for the states to maintain, public services from health to water to roads, etc. But their revenue flexibility has gone down.
See, generally the tendency is as the economy gets more and more integrated, the revenue collection, the advantage will be centralization of revenue collection. But the services are local. So in a way, as the economy progresses, there will be the gap between the centralized revenue and decentralized expenditure increases. I think that is what we are seeing now in some ways.
Okay. And there's also the matter of, the government, whatever space it has yielded, some of it is making up through more reliance on cess and surcharge. And I think that is also a little worrisome because that is not shared with the states.
Yes, I think that has been a constant complaint about the states. Apart from another complaint also about the states have been saying is that some of the exemptions that are given, including the level of the taxation. So in other words, while the center takes the stand that the states are not exploiting all their taxable potential, the states say that the center is not exploiting all the tax potential. In fact, the large-scale existence of the black money itself is a sign that income tax is not being collected as much as it should be collected. So this, let me say there is something disturbing about the recent events which you mentioned, which we did not mention in the book, but as we are discussing it is striking. There are two disturbing things that are happening. In regard to the revenues, there has been a lot more exemptions that is happening in terms of incentives. There is a competitive foregoing of revenue. When it comes to expenditure, there is a competitive subsidies and goodies. So now the center and states are competing with each other to do similar things. I think that is something not very good, even for fiscal federal relations, because then you are going into a low level of equilibrium. I think that's also an angle which should be looked at in the relations.
But who should look at this issue of cess, etc.? Is it the job of the council? Is it the job of the Finance Commission? Who can look at, what is a reasonable level of cess?
Okay. The issue of cess has been addressed by several Finance Commissions. All the Finance Commissions said cess, the way it is being done, should be avoided. And they pleaded with the government that they should be avoided. But it's continuing. In fact, in the context of GST, it's even more important. I think my co-author, Dr. G. Reddy, will explain how, after the introduction of GST, the recourse to cess is totally unjustified.
So you want to explain why?
Actually, GST has subsumed something like 13 to 14 cesses. We thought that, okay, the problem to a large extent is solved. But again, the center resorted levying cesses on imported goods and other things. The level of cesses remains the same as a percentage of gross tax revenue of the center. Now we have this, there is also concern with regard to the compensation cess, which is levied by the center to compensate the states for the possible revenue in the first 5 years of the implementation of GST. And the reports are that I think the center is collecting far more money than what is required to be compensated. Because the compensation is, is fixed with reference to 14% year-on-year growth. And some of the states most of the states are clocking higher than 14%. Even the earlier expectation that the manufacturing states will lose out is also not borne out by the developments post GST. Now the problem is that the right thing for the center should have been to reduce the compensation cess. Instead, what is under the GST law, this compensation cess will remain parked. Whatever is the amount undisbursed will remain parked with the center for 5 years. The center has access to all this money as a float. So this will get distributed to the states after 5 years. So why not center come forward and say that we are collecting far too much of money and then reduce this cess accordingly, which is not being done.
Okay. There's also the issue, some administrative issues on cess which have been raised by the CAG, Dr. Reddy, on whether it's being used for the intended purpose, whether it's lying for too long, whether it's being used at the time frame that it should have been.
Yeah, that's the second concern. The first concern is the states are deprived of their share by levying the cess. And second, which is a more aspect of fiscal management, fiscal transparency and appropriateness. I think the CAG is the right authority to point out, and I'm glad it did. In fact, CAG pointed out something else also, which is relevant to the center-state relations. This is with regard to the understatement of the fiscal deficit by various means. I think that makes the whole issue of center-state fiscal transfers and various conditionalities difficult to assess when the data itself or the transparency itself is questioned by none other than the CAG.
You're essentially saying that the center's fiscal deficit is sort of a mirage.
Not mirage, but I thought CAG himself has certified that there is a bit of an understatement.
So then it creates an impression that it's the center which is consolidating while the states are not, but that may not be entirely true?
No, actually the impression given is that the center is concealing the fact that it is not consolidating.
To the CAG, yes, but as to the broader, constituency, it looks like the center's fiscal deficit and fiscal management is appropriate, and it's the states where you need more fiscal oversight and better fiscal management.
On a judgmental basis, we can say that states are bad, but center is worse in fiscal management as per the fiscal parameters. I don't know that Dr. J. R. Reddy will agree.
No, actually, states as a whole have adhered to the fiscal deficit targets because in any case, I think they need to take the consent of the center. So states are able to maintain their fiscal deficit at 3%. And most of the states have been able to eliminate the revenue deficit. Whereas the center is running a revenue deficit of 2.2% of GDP. And it's also running a fiscal deficit of 3.4% of the GDP. So consistently, center has been failing in adhering to the fiscal rules more than the states. And look at they also do this, creative kind of an accounting. So they brought in the concept of this adjusted revenue deficit. So the revenue deficit that is being incurred by the center is not strictly comparable with that incurred by the states. So the revenue deficit is revenue expenditure minus grants given for capital creation is the effective revenue deficit. So the fiscal performance of the center is judged with reference to the adjusted revenue deficit. And actually, Dr. Reddy's commission has recommended saying that this is not in consonance with the international practice and this should be given away. This practice should go.
Now they want to do away with revenue deficit targeting entirely, but that's not a,
Yes.
it's a different issue.
Yes.
Right. Okay. The other, the FRBM review committee, sir, that had been chaired by Mr. N.K. Singh, had also put these, looked at public debt. They wanted a 60% aggregate, and within that they had a share of center and states. Did the FRBM review committee also once again tilt the scales a little bit against states in terms of their flexibility to raise debt?
I think that is what is derived from, if you derive the implications of N.K. Singh Review Committee, then the adjustment path has been burden is more on the state than on the center. Dr. G. Reddy, would you like to explain how it happened?
No, actually what they said is that I think now they've taken it, they've looked at the savings, the public savings. So I said, okay, the 5% should go to the government and 5% should be for private investment. So this 5% which is available for public investment is equally distributed between the center and the states, 2.5% for the states and 2.5% for the center. This is how they arrived at the fiscal deficit target. But when it comes to the adjustment part, we find that the states are required to make a lot more adjustment than the center. So I think this logic is not very clear to us, at least to me.
Okay, understood. The last topic I wanted to bring up was that of the Planning Commission being abolished. Niti Aayog was set up in its place, but I think the book makes the case that the Niti Aayog has a very wide mandate, yet it is perhaps not being able to fill all the gaps left by the Planning Commission. Dr. Reddy?
Yes. If you look at the intergovernmental transfers, first the sharing of taxes. It is not a transfer in some sense, it's a share. And once it is fixed, that's the end of the matter. So therefore we come to the grants. There are two channels of grants. One is on the basis of the recommendations of the Finance Commission and outside the Finance Commission recommendations. On the basis of the recommendations of the Finance Commission is only 1/3 of the total flow. 2/3 are major part of the flow of resources from the center to the states happens outside the Finance Commission recommendations. Earlier there was one common institution in Government of India, Planning Commission, that used to take a state view of the transfers and the composition also. Sometimes general assistance and other centrally sponsored schemes, sectoral grants, etc. Now there is no coherent picture of a state in its relationship with the center in regard to these transfers. So that's a vacuum. Each ministry can have its own centrally sponsored schemes. So there is no coherent center and state having a discussion and coordinating the developmental thrust. And this is the main bone of contention in intergovernmental transfers is the non-finance commission grants. And that vacuum has to be filled in. Whereas, interestingly, the debate now is a lot more on the Finance Commission, whereas it should actually be the institutional vacuum in regard to the transfers under non-finance commission account.
But that's not for the lack of mandate of Niti Aayog, as in their mandate seems to be broad enough. Should they want to take this role, can they, or is it not within the charter?
But Niti Aayog, as we have explained in the book, the canvas is wide, but it has to have political authority, because it's only advisory. Second, it should have adequate expertise. So in a way, and the stature, and on all three counts, Niti Aayog comes far below if at all it does not really provide an institutional setup that was recommended by 14th Finance Commission in the context of the totality of the center-state relations. When you take a comprehensive view, 14th Finance Commission recommended creation of an institution, but Niti Aayog is nowhere near what it was envisaged.
Instead, it is finding its way into one controversy after the other, particularly on economic data, which may or may not be their mandate, Dr. Reddy.
Yes, actually, it's an interesting issue. It is getting new mandate. But no, the old mandate itself was very loose. But I think new mandate, in a way it is relevant, but in a way, see, one important factor remains, whether it is Planning Commission or Niti Aayog, it's the creature of the union government. It is advisory. It is political. The term of office is coterminous with the Prime Minister. These three are facts of life. Whereas in the totality of the Indian polity, there is a state government and a union government. And then there are national institutions. They serve both the centre and states. Comptroller and Auditor General, Reserve Bank of India, Chief Election Commissioner. When these institutions are dealt, they discharge functions of both union and state, and they are not part of the union in that sense. So in a way, when the union government is functioning, it is functioning sometimes as union government, sometimes as a national government, combining the interests of the union and state. So I find very often, if somebody is against the union government, it is treated as against national interest. I think that distinction will be useful in discussing various institutions and policies. There is a union versus state, then there is a union and state, which is a national issue. I think that distinction, when you put that in the context, Planning Commission or Niti Aayog are creatures of the union government, but union government will have to convince the states that though they are creatures of the union government, they are national institutions. They should work together. That's what was done in the beginning years when the National Development Council was active. But after the first 20 years, National Development Council was not active. So that umbrella has gone now, in reality, though formally it may exist.
That's very well put. But in the absence of that structure, Dr. G. R. Reddy, what are the practical problems that states are facing?
The immediate problem that I see is there is absolutely no agency which takes care of the growing inequalities in income across the states post reforms. That's a major concern, which is largely outside the remit of the Finance Commission. So which organization is going to take care of this? And central transfers by and large are very, very regressive. They are running a number of centrally sponsored schemes, spreading resources too thinly to have any impact in a particular sector. Because almost in most of the sectors like education, health, social services, it is the state governments which are spending 80%. So CSS is only supplemental, providing 15 to 20% of the total expenditure. And even the centrally sponsored schemes are basically revenue based in the sense that they don't cater to the requirements of the states in capex. So that is where there is a need for some institutional mechanism to find ways of promoting investment in the backward states.
Okay, understood. Dr. Reddy, I'm running out of time. I'll put a last question to you. Whenever you write or say something, there is always a hidden underlying message that you're giving out. You may use a lot of history, but there is always a message for the future. What is the core message that you're sending out through this book, Dr. Reddy?
The core message is that in a federation, particularly in a federation like India, the important thing is the trust. There should be trust in each other. There should be mutual trust. And I think the changes, some of the institutional changes and policy changes undertaken recently are good, but they have their repercussions on these relationships. And in the actual implementation, there is a feeling that there is a trust deficit between the center and the states. And that should be addressed sooner than later.
Dr. Reddy, thank you so much. Dr. G. R. Reddy, thank you so much. Pleasure speaking to you.